A client commissioned me to build him an electronic charging cabinet, and he's going to put it on his kitchen counter. So what do we know about it? Well, we know that it's going to be a dovetail cabinet that's approximately 21 inches long by 14 inches tall. We know that when we look at it from the side, we also want it to be approximately 12 inches deep. We want a door that flips down. We want a shelf that we can pull out. That way we can put all the electronics on it. So now that we have this rough concept drawn out, we can start building. So once again, my name's Billy. Welcome to my shop. And now let's take this rough drawing and turn it into a charging station. We're going to start by prepping the materials for the sides. All of our pieces need to be approximately 3/4 of an inch thick and 11 1/4 inch wide. The two side pieces need to be 14 inches long, and the top and the bottom pieces need to be 21 inches long. While the sides are drying, I'm going to make the back of the cabinet. The back panel is about 3/8 of an inch thick. I'll make it roughly 20 inches long by 15 inches wide, but the ultimate dimensions will be ironed out once I cut the grooves in the cabinet to house the back. I need two 1-inch holes in the back so that power cables can be ran into the cabinet. Since the back panel is thin, instead of using clamp string to glue up, I used painter's tape. Some weights kept the panel held down to the table saw. Ultimately, the glue seam was invisible and the panel was dead flat. Pre-finishing the back is a good idea. We have to account for wood movement. As humidity changes throughout the seasons, the panel is going to expand and contract along its width. By pre-finishing, we'll ensure that when the panel moves, no bare spots will be visible where we didn't apply finish. I cut the sides for the cabinet to their final width and length. While I was at it, I went ahead and pre-sanded the inside face. I figured it was much easier to do this now than after it's already assembled. We're going to use Dovetail Joinery for two main reasons. One, they're really strong, but also because the client's kitchen was made in the 1800s and we wanted some sort of classic element to complement the room. I have to cut a groove to house the back panel. In order to avoid an entrance and an exit point, I plunged my piece onto the router bit and lifted the piece up once I got to the end. The door will flip down using some modern European hinges. I won't have enough room to drill the holes for the hinges once the cabinet is together, so I drilled them before assembly. I'm about to glue up the charging station, but before I do that, I took a little bit of time to make these cauls. So these are just some scrap blocks, and I carved grooves in them, so I have these little notches, and these notches fit perfectly onto my tails. That way, whenever I clamp this together, I'm gonna get really good clamping pressure directly on the tails, so they fully seat into my pins. Now watch me fiddle around with this thing in order to get it clamped up. Everything was square, so I let it dry before tackling all the sanding. And man, was there a lot of sanding on this project. It's time to make the door, which entails multiple mini projects unto themselves. We have the door, which is going to be 21 inches long by 14 inches wide. Then we have the handle. Instead of using hardware, we're going to cut out a rectangular groove that lets us open the door. Lastly, we're going to add some metal to boost the modern feel up a bit. We'll cut a channel, that way we can inlay an aluminum stripe. I don't usually use reinforcements when I glue up panels. However, the door is wider than my planer, so I knew I couldn't easily plane the piece down to make it flat. So I used some dominoes to help with the alignment, and this also allows me to do a little bit of prep work and sanding, that way I can just quickly move on to cutting the door down to its final size. Just like with the cabinet, I drilled holes in the door for the hinges. This is the first time that I get to see the cabinet together. It's time to make the rectangular indent for the door, which will be done using the plunge router. I use double-sided tape to stick an edge guide to the door. This lets me make an even pass to carve out the bottom section of the rectangle. Some blocks on the side ensure I don't go past my lines. I generally plunge down with the router bit at each end, and then I make multiple passes to remove the waste in the middle. I then attach another guide block. This allows me to cut the groove for the top of the handle. I do the same thing as before. Plunge down on the ends, make multiple passes to remove out the middle. Now that the top and the bottom are done, I can remove the rest of the wood in the middle of the rectangle. I used a chisel to square up all of the corners. You can use typical woodworking tools to cut aluminum. This isn't necessary, but I like to tape the aluminum to a strip of wood. I found that it helps me to guide the piece through the saw a little bit easier. Using a ripping blade, I made multiple passes to cut out the channel until the metal fits. After gluing it into place, the door was sanded to 220 grit. We have some unique challenges with the shelf. To start, we want the shelf to be approximately 19.5 inches long by 10 inches wide. And it'll have a notch cut out in the back. This allows power cords to run along the back panel of the cabinet. The client specifically wanted the shelf to be on drawer slides. In order to do this, but also hide the slides as much as possible, we're going to attach runners along the underside of the shelf so that the slides can screw into these and the shelf will then cover them. Then we're going to hide these runners by attaching a front apron to the shelf. This will also give us something to grab whenever we pull the shelf out of the cabinet. With the shelf complete, it's time to bring life to this walnut. I love seeing dovetails pop when you apply finish to them. My favorite part is the door. The finish on the aluminum stripe and inside the recessed handle looks amazing. I used a plywood guide to attach the shelf slides, and then I screwed in the hinges. The shelf goes into place and the cabinet construction is done. One last thing to do. We need to add a magnet to the cabinet in the door. Easy enough. We drill a small hole that holds a metal cup and a magnet. And then a metal washer is then screwed into the door.
So there you have it. I'm thrilled with how it turned out. It's a good blend between tradition and modern. The dovetails give it that traditional look, but then it has the modern European hinges and the metal stripe in the door. And that was the client's idea, and I think it was great. It really pops with the walnut. So I'm gonna wrap this up and ship it out to the client. Hopefully they will enjoy it for years to come. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date on the latest happenings in my shop. You can also find me on Instagram at Genealogist Woodworker. And until we meet again, get in your shop and build something awesome.